Hello, everybody. Welcome into GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Tuesday, January 14th. I hope everybody is having a great day so far. We have a lot to cover, still going over stuff from this weekend and the major breaking news from yesterday. The contract officially expired today on Cowboys head coach Mike McCarthy. We're going to talk about what his next steps are, what the Cowboys' next steps are, as well as the other head coach vacancy that was filled earlier this weekend, with Mike Vrabel officially being hired with the Patriots. Other news, the Rams, they absolutely destroyed the Vikings last night, 27-9. We'll talk about that game and winners from the wild card round as well as losers. But before we get into any of that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday, January 14th. But like I was saying, we are going to start off our show today with the big news coming out of the world of football, and that is the Cowboys have officially let go of Mike McCarthy. His contract officially expired today, just a couple of hours ago, but this news became official yesterday. Now, this is one that had me scratching my head, quite honestly. This is one that showed up a little bit out of nowhere, and the timing of it is the one that had me in the most confusion, right? First of all, they let him walk a week after everybody else goes. So they're already behind in the hiring cycle. Cowboys seemed like they were interested in keeping Mike McCarthy. This was early on in the cycle because the Bears were one of those teams that were looking at a guy like Mike McCarthy, knowing that this was a possibility. They asked for an interview. They asked for permission to interview Mike McCarthy. The Cowboys said no. And I don't know if this is a situation of the Cowboys changing their mind or Mike McCarthy changing his mind or something going on, but something clearly happened within the last week to go from where the sides were reportedly dealing in money, had money agreements figured out, to now where they have parted ways. Mike McCarthy is a free agent head coach, and the Cowboys are now the sixth team with a head coaching vacancy. And the Cowboys' head coaching vacancy is a lot different than any other head coaching vacancy that's out there, right? Or it's very unique in the fact that, first of all, the timing. And again, that's the biggest mystery in all of this for me when we're breaking down this story, the timing of everything. Because they don't get access to guys like Mike Vrabel, who had already been hired as a head coach. They no longer have the ability to get that. So if they were interested in a guy like that, in a guy who potentially is on a team with a bye week, they lose those first dibs interviews with a guy like Ben Johnson, who every other team that was interested interviewed him this last week. With a guy like Aaron Glenn, again, every team that was interested interviewed him last week. Now, those guys are still obviously not hired. They're still guys that are out there in the coaching cycle, and the Cowboys have a chance after they are done to interview them, but at that point, it might be too late. So for everything that I've seen, looking at Ben Johnson potentially to the Cowboys, it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, other potential options for the Cowboys, we've heard a lot of noise around some big names, and we're going to break those down first. Deion Sanders. That is the first big name that we have heard. And when you look at the betting sites or the odds for coaches to be hired by Jerry Jones and the Cowboys, he is number one, plus 100 to go and be hired by the Dallas Cowboys. That's even money. And if he's going to go anywhere, if he's going to leave Colorado with his sons and go anywhere, it's probably going to be Dallas. But the question is he a guy that needs to coach his sons? Because we've said this before, the one thing that will drive him to the NFL immediately is if he gets to coach Shadur and Shiloh, right? That's not something I really see happening with the Cowboys. Now, there is a nightmare scenario for the Cowboys, I think, where they decide, hey, we're throwing everything out, we're doing a hard reset, bring in Deion, trade for the second or third overall pick, draft Shadur Sanders, then go grab Shiloh as an undrafted free agent because he's not going to get drafted, right? That's a nightmare scenario for the Cowboys, I think. But maybe they want that hard reset. Maybe they feel like they can get a lot for trading Dak. That's not going to happen. But there are a lot of questions surrounding this Dallas Cowboys team, of course. It's not just Dion. There's some other big name coaches out there that have had their names swirling around this. Bill Belichick being one. Obviously, he's a guy that every single time there's a head coach vacancy, as long as he is in the spotlight, he's going to get speculation. He had speculation with the Raiders and Tom Brady, and now with the Cowboys. I doubt that he leaves college. Jerry Jones is a guy that would pay that $10 million $10 million buyout that would be owed to North Carolina if it is something that happens. But I just don't really see that happening. I don't think Bill Belichick has committed to this only to immediately turn around and say, actually, I'm going to go coach the Cowboys. The one that I think is a little bit interesting, and the one that I've seen thrown around as far as big names that are kind of out there, Steve Sarkisian, the head coach of Texas. Obviously, he's got some sort of relationship there with Jerry Jones, and he just coached his team to 2 straight top 4s in a row. Now, the reason that I don't see this happening, as pointed out by Tommy, the other show host here, he does the college football podcast, is they have Arch Manning coming up. And unless there's some real big red flags with Arch Manning, I just don't see Sark leaving Texas to go coach the Cowboys, which leads you with some more normal options, I will say. Guys like Kellen Moore have been getting a lot of buzz, and he's someone that obviously Jerry Jones and the Cowboys really did like. They wanted to keep him around. They kept him around from the old coaching staff to the new coaching staff when Mike McCarthy was hired originally. Obviously, he has since left and is now coaching as the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles. That is a reunion that I could very easily see happening. Other names out there, obviously you have Ben Johnson, although I think that's a little bit more far-fetched because he's already done his interviews with everyone, and unless he looks at the Cowboys job with $4 million of cap space, everything basically set in stone, and he says, I really want to coach that roster. That's the roster that I want to hang my hat on. Then I don't really see Ben Johnson taking a stab at that job for the Cowboys. Cliff Kingsbury is an interesting one. He obviously is still getting paid by the Cardinals. He's done a phenomenal job as the offensive coordinator for Jaden Daniels in the Washington Commanders. Another guy that you can't interview right now because they are in the playoffs, but another name that you might have to look at as a potential guy, maybe a retread over there. There's lots of different options for the Cowboys, but I think Kellen Moore is the name that makes the most sense. I don't think they're going to be able to lure Dion out of college. I think it's just going to be a little bit too much, and it doesn't make sense right now. So Kellen Moore is the guy that I think they bring in to replace Mike McCarthy. Obviously, that relationship is still there, and if there's one thing we know about Jerry Jones, he's a guy that really values having those relationships. As far as it goes on the other side of things, Mike McCarthy is still in the cycle here to go get hired as a head coach. Now, again, he's at a disadvantage here a little bit because he got put into the cycle late. Whether that be his fault or the Cowboys' fault, there's some mystery piece of information that one of those two sides got that caused this deal to fall through. Maybe Mike McCarthy, I've heard reports and rumors that Mike McCarthy wanted more term and the Cowboys were just not interested in that. But the Bears, obviously a team that were interested in him, maybe they want to go and sign him as the head coach. The Saints also expected to go and interview Mike McCarthy. He's a guy that has had relatively solid records in his 2 stops. Obviously, with the Packers, he won a Super Bowl long time ago with Aaron Rodgers, and then was relatively successful, I would say, with the Cowboys. Even this season, one that seemed dead, he was able to rally them once they got a little more healthy. They went on that little bit of a win streak down the stretch, and they played good football at the end of the season. And that's something that I think is really important, that shows how much a team cares for a coach, especially a team that's already been eliminated. The way that they were playing as hard as they could, playing their best football at the end of the year, is something that I really value when we talk about coaches. And Mike McCarthy is a guy that I think will get another opportunity, whether it be this year or next year. He's going to get another opportunity. He might have to wait a year like Mike Vrabel in that coaching free agency bubble, take a couple, odd jobs as like as just a couple assistants or something, but he'll get a job somewhere soon. Mike McCarthy has earned that. He's got that reputation around the league. I think the Bears is an interesting one. I don't know if it's in their best interest to go get a retread head coach like Mike McCarthy for Caleb Williams, unless Mike McCarthy has some brilliant offensive plan specifically designed around Caleb Williams. I don't know if that's the best option for them. The Saints, though, I really do like that fit. This is a Saints team that, if we're being completely honest, has one of the worst futures in the NFL right now. There's not a lot to look forward to. They are in cap purgatory. They are in negative cap space right now. They're going to continue to rework contracts, and everything is falling apart, right? We knew this would happen sooner rather than later, and they had to hit that reset button. They hit it quickly, they hit it fast, and they're just going to have to deal. Mike McCarthy is a guy that has that reputation that could handle being put on a bad team. The Saints aren't going to go and hire a first-time head coach and ruin their prospects of, ever really being a head coach in the future, unless they really say, hey, you've got a super long leash here. I could see Mike McCarthy going to New Orleans and being successful down there, at least riding out the bad years for a little bit and not completely ruining them. That's where I think he'll end up, in New Orleans. But let me know what you think. What went on in Dallas? Why did Jerry Jones and Mike McCarthy have that falling out? I think some news came across either Jerry Jones's desk or Mike McCarthy had a change of heart or something, and the negotiations ended up falling through. This doesn't feel like plan A for either side. But let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we turn our attention to the other head coaching spot that got filled over the weekend, that of the New England Patriots. Mike Vrabel, the new head coach over there. We'll talk about what that means for him, for the future, and whether or not that was a good hire. We'll be right back here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Tuesday, January 14th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the big story of the last couple of days, that being Mike McCarthy officially out as the Cowboys head coach, a falling out. The contract expired officially today. In this segment, we turn our attention to the other head coaching news from the weekend. A busy weekend in sports as the Patriots have hired Mike Vrabel to replace Jerod Mayo. A huge get for them. The one that everybody knew was going to happen based off reports. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what it looks like for the future for the Patriots in just a second. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday, January 14th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the other head coaching hire. The Patriots have officially hired Mike Vrabel to be the replacement for Jerod Mayo, the handpicked successor to Bill Belichick. A move that was not so secret, probably the worst kept secret in all of sports for the week that they were conducting interviews. And the big, I guess, controversy surrounding this move is how they handled the hiring slash firing of Mike Vrabel and Gerard Mayo, right? Obviously, this was a pre planned decision. They had that note come out from the Crafts, came out about an hour after their season ended. That's not a statement that comes out if you're really thinking it over and having to make a tough decision like firing a head coach. Now, there is room for debate whether or not this was a decision that was made in the middle of the season or a decision that was made from the get-go when the hand-picked successor just they knew was not going to be the answer. Now, I'm more on the camp of, hey, they just decided, hey, look, Mike Vrabel is available. We want him instead. That's where it goes to. The question is, did they make that decision in the preseason, or did they make that decision in the middle of the season? These two coaches, to me, are, in all honesty, very similar, right? Mike Vrabel and Gerard Mayo, they both played for the Patriots organization. They're both more players coaches than scheme coaches. And those are the two, I guess, archetypes of coaches. You have your players coaches, you have your Mike Vrabels, you have your Dan Campbells, you have your guys like Mike Tomlin, and then you have your scheme coaches. You've got your Sean McVays, you've got your Kyle Shanahans, and obviously you need bits and pieces of everything, but there are general categories, right? And that's the way that I like to look at coaches. The Patriots deciding to bring in a retread for a team that has a future that you could potentially see is bright. You obviously have a quarterback in Drake May who showed a lot of signs of being successful. If I was the Patriots, and this is nothing against Mike Vrabel, I think Mike Vrabel is a really good head coach. I think he's a guy that didn't deserve to get fired in Tennessee. It was kind of the end of an era, one where they were cleaning house. They obviously let go of him. They also let Derrick Henry walk. That was kind of a, hey, we're going to hit the reset button kind of move over there in Tennessee. But it wasn't really anything he did wrong, right? He had that falling out with the GM. They hired the wrong guy. They didn't like each other. He ends up losing that power struggle. He's on the streets. He's just working a little bit around the NFL. Now the Patriots bring him in, and it just feels like the same thing with a different outfit on. And I'm not saying it's not going to work. I'm not saying that, because Mike Vrabel clearly has a history of getting the best out of his players. But when you get a coach like that, you need a roster to match. And right now, this Patriots roster just isn't that. Mike Vrabel is a guy that can elevate, but he's not a guy that's going to turn these players that aren't the most skilled in the world into Pro Bowl style players, into guys that are going to get big contracts in free agency. And sure, they can go draft well. They can go figure out and fill a lot of holes, especially now that they have a high pick in the top 5. They already have their quarterback. They already knows what holes they need to fix. They have a lot of cap space. When I say I have a lot of cap space, they have a lot of cap space. And they can do a lot of good. I'm not saying this is going to be a turnaround like that for the Patriots, but this isn't the number one option at head coach that I think is the best for them. I think he will be successful. He was successful in Tennessee with a roster that honestly was probably just slightly better than the one that he has in New England right now, going 54-45 over his 6-year tenure there. 2-3 in the playoffs, made it to an AFC championship game one year, did it with guys like Marcus Mariota, Ryan Tannehill, right? He obviously had a lot of help. He had Derrick Henry the whole time, someone you could really rely on and not be such a heavy pass team, but still, he did a good job with what he was given, injuries that he was able to deal with. So this is a good hire. This is a low reward, this is a low risk, high reward kind of hire, right? You're not going to get a floor raising that you got when the Rams hired Sean McVay or the 49ers hired Kyle Shanahan. You're not getting that genius scheme football guy that's going to come in and revolutionize whatever you're doing offensively or defensively. But it is something where he's going to raise the floor of everybody on your team, and that is sometimes just as valuable. Sometimes you just need that leader of men in there. So do I think this is a good hire? Yes, I do. Do I think this is the best hire? I think they could have potentially gone out, especially with the situation they're in, and tried to lure a guy in that would have really, really put a super high ceiling on this Patriots organization, right? They go out and they get potentially Ben Johnson that can scheme these guys open. He has a quarterback potentially that he likes, a top 5 pick, and a lot of cap space. That is a job that a lot of people would covet. Instead, they kind of handpicked their guy. They knew who they were getting. And again, not necessarily a bad pick, but it's not what I would have done if I were in the Patriots organization. But let me know what you think. Would you have done that? Would you have hired Mike Vrabel? Would he have been your number one option? I'd love to hear your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, the game from last night, the wild card round finished up. The Rams took care of business, absolutely dominating the Minnesota Vikings, sending them packing in Arizona. We're going to talk about that game coming up in just a second here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Tuesday, January 14th. If you are just tuning in, we just finished going over the 2 head coaching news that came out over the weekend and yesterday, with Mike McCarthy officially out as the head coach for the Dallas Cowboys and the Patriots bringing in their head coach for the future in Mike Vrabel. In this segment, we turn our attention to the action from last night. The Rams took down the Vikings in brutal fashion to advance to the divisional round against the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll talk about that game and its consequences for the Vikings, especially coming up in just a second. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those 2 things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday, January 14th. But like I was saying, we're going to get into the big news from yesterday in the NFL, that being that final wild card game of Super Wild Card Weekend that saw the Rams absolutely blow the doors off of the Minnesota Vikings. And this is one that was kind of a toss-up. Obviously, there are themes there for the Vikings, but I want to start with the Rams on this one and what they did great. First of all, their physicality, especially on the defensive end, racking up 9 sacks. 9 sacks in a playoff game is huge. We talk about, I don't think as a media group we talk about enough how big sacks are in the game of football, especially for the defensive side of the ball. They are such a negative play. They are drive killers, drive stallers, and when you take 9 sacks in a game, you are just simply not going to win it, unless your defense on the other end has some kind of magical game. You're not going to win if you give up and take 9 sacks. They also were able to score a touchdown on one of those sacks, a 57-yard fumble return for a touchdown by Jared Verse after a strip sack of Sam Darnold. That was just an absolute dominant game for the Rams, especially on the defensive line. That's going up against a Vikings offensive line that, well, it's not a top 10 unit in the league. It's definitely a solid unit. It's one that you look at and you're not mad about if you have to stand behind it. And they were giving Sam Darnold time in the pocket. But what that defensive line was able to do and what that secondary was able to do, making Sam Darnold uncomfortable, making him hold the ball just that split second too long, gave them exactly what they needed in this game, and they hold the Vikings to just 9 points. Now the Vikings, second week in a row, being held to just 9 points, but it's not just this, right? They have lost 4 games all season, right? If you include the playoff game that just happened. They've only lost to 2 teams. That's it. They've only lost to 2 teams. They finished 14-4 on the season. They've lost back-to-back games to the Lions and the Rams twice this season. And that's just one of those things that is a coincidence in the NFL sometimes. But sometimes you just can't beat these teams. Now, in the regular season, when they first matched up in weeks 7 and 8, the Lions versus the Vikings and the Rams versus the Vikings, Sam Darnold played, good football. In these last 2 games, week 18, pseudo playoff game, and the wild card playoff game, the 2 biggest games of Sam Darnold's career, he played awful. And that is the big storyline of this game, right? Sam Darnold was the big question mark heading into this season, was the big question mark heading into these games for the Minnesota Vikings, right? All season long, he'd played at a Pro Bowl level. There is no doubt about that. He has been amazing as a quarterback, and there's nothing you can do to take what he did this season away. But he has left just a sour taste in everybody's mouth with his last 2 performances, the 2 biggest games of his life, and he came out and gave us 2 stinkers. Against the Lions and against the Rams, he kept overthrowing his targets. And honestly, against the Rams, they weren't able to get anything going. Even on the ground, they weren't able to get anything going. So it's not all on him, but a lot of it is on him. You can talk about what he did wrong, and that can be the symptom, right? He held the ball for way, way too long. Some of those sacks were because the pass rush got home quickly. But in a normal game, if he's firing on all cylinders, if he's playing poised and confidently, the Vikings probably only give up about 5 sacks in this game, which is still a lot. Lots of credit to the Rams for that. But 4 other sacks that are probably just on the quarterback is not a good look for your team. It's not a good look for Sam Darnold, who people will use this as an audition tape for his upcoming free agency. If you remember, this is a 1-year deal, and that has been the big question for the Vikings, for Sam Darnold. What are they going to do? And that's what you have to answer right away, right? It seemed like the press conference from Kevin O'Connell of the Minnesota Vikings was that they were parting ways. He sounded like he was remembering a friend from his past. He said, Sam Darnold will always have a special place in my heart. He's done amazing things for this team on the field, off the field. I had a great time coaching him, but it did not sound like they are bringing him back, which makes him like the big fish in free agency for quarterbacks at least. And maybe the Vikings decide, hey, we'll bring him back on a cheap deal, but he definitely played himself out of cheap deal range like he got this season, because he did, again, have a really good season. But when the moments are the biggest, when the lights are the brightest, he has been unable time and time again to show up. And that is one of those things that's very important when you're trying to find a franchise quarterback. You not only want a guy to be your franchise quarterback that can take you to these big moments, that can get you the wins, that can make your team a successful regular season team, but you want a guy that when you get there can step up in those big moments and can lead your team effectively, cannot be a negative at a minimum. And there's plenty of good examples of that. But when you're talking about Sam Darnold, he was a guy that we were talking about just 3 weeks ago at getting $50 million a year. He is looking at now probably getting around 40, looking at like a Baker Mayfield type contract. And that's because he is the big fish in free agency. It's a not great quarterback draft. There are 7 or 8 teams that are really looking to get a quarterback, and he is someone that is available. He is someone that will get paid by someone, but there's going to be a lot of hesitancy. I don't think Sam Darnold, and again, I think Sam Darnold is a good quarterback. I think he's a quarterback that is deserving of Baker Mayfield type numbers if he's in the right situation. But you saw the way that he handled those high pressure games if he goes to a team that I think will end up signing him in the Las Vegas Raiders. I don't think that is a team that is going to be good for him. With the Vikings, it is just about the perfect environment you could possibly want to be in to be a successful bridge quarterback, right? You have the weapons. You have Jordan Addison. You have Justin Jefferson. You have TJ Hawkinson. You have Aaron Jones. You have a pretty good offensive line, and you have a really good defense, right? That checks every single box that you need to check as a quarterback for your look for a perfect destination, right? Just about any quarterback could succeed with Kevin O'Connell's scheme. Put that coach check mark there as well. If you take Sam Darnold out of there, he's not going to regress back to his Jets form. I don't think he will. But he is for sure not going to be as good as he was this year. And I think a lot of teams are just going to have to bite the bullet when they're bidding for Sam Darnold. He's still going to get paid, but he has lost just about $10 to $15 million a year, probably about $40 to $50 million total because of his performances in these last big games. Again, a guy that I think deserves another chance, a guy that I think deserves another contract because 4,000 yards, almost 30 touchdowns is a really good season. But there's also the risk that you have to understand when you bring in a guy like Sam Darnold. I think he's still going to get paid the most. Not in Minnesota, though. But let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this game, on Sam Darnold. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, winners and losers from the wild card round. The wild card round, of course, officially over. We got 5 winners, 5 losers coming up next here on here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Tuesday, January 14th. If you were just tuning in, we just finished going over the final wildcard weekend game between the Rams and the Vikings that saw the Vikings lose 27-9, eliminating them from the playoffs. The Rams advanced to take on the Philadelphia Eagles. In this segment, we go over winners and losers from a wild card weekend. Lots of blowouts, lots of big winners, lots of big losers. We'll talk about that in just a second. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those two things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday, January 14th. But like I was saying, we are going to get into the winners from a wild card weekend. The biggest winners here, I've got 5 picked out, just like we did in the regular season. This one, of course, a shorter list. But at number 5, just very broadly, the NFL won this week at number 5. They had the matchups that they wanted in the second round. Obviously, you have the big one that's going to be the big focus point, the Ravens versus the Bills. That is going to be the big focus point for this week. But also you get a Texans versus Chiefs game that at the end of the day, I think will be a lot more competitive than a Chargers game. You get 2 rematches on the NFC side, Eagles versus Rams. That one turned out a little bad for the Rams, but still, they're playing a lot better defense right now than they were when they first played, and a Commanders versus Lions game that is just going to be wild, right? That is going to be a game with absolutely no defense, absolutely a million points being scored. The NFL wins. They get probably the best possible matchups that they could have gotten in the divisional round of the playoffs. They are 5th biggest winner of the week here. At number 4, I put very simply defenses. They won a lot of these games. Obviously, we just finished talking about the Monday night game. That Rams defense won that game for them more than the Rams offense did. And the Rams offense did not need to do much. They did their job. They didn't turn the ball over. They did what they needed to. But that defense is what really won the game for them, right? You had defenses of the Texans winning the game for them. The defense of the Eagles won that game for them when the offense was not being very effective, but the defenses are really, really stepping up this year in what has been a kind of down year for scoring. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? You don't need scoring to have a, exciting game or an exciting season. But when these defenses are playing great, like they have been all playoffs long, like all these teams in the playoffs have great defenses, you get close games most of the time. And I think you're going to start to see that as we move further and further along in the playoffs. At number 3, very simply, it's Jaden Daniels. What Jaden Daniels did in the playoffs there has got me thinking of putting him in conversations that honestly he probably doesn't deserve to be in, right? What he's been able to do, especially in clutch time, especially as a rookie, and especially on a franchise like Washington's that has been so down in the dumps for so long, is incredible. I have really put a lot of brain power into avoiding saying that he is a top 5 quarterback in the league right now, but I don't think that that's too far off. Right? He is a guy that obviously behind the big 4 in Mahomes, Allen, Burrow, and Lamar Jackson, who do you have at 5, right? Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts. I don't see why not. I don't see why you can't have a guy like Jaden Daniels in that discussion at number 5. Now, I'm not saying I will die on this hill, but what he has been able to do all season, and especially in the big moments, we just got finished talking about how Sam Darnold was unable to step up in the big moments. Jaden Daniels is a guy that I think you could pretty comfortably argue is potentially the 5th best quarterback in the NFL right now, and he is just a rookie. That is crazy to say, but he is something special. What he's able to do with his legs and with his arms is ridiculous, right? His ability to extend plays, and again, well, he takes sacks. His sack avoidance is something that's very impressive, right? I just got finished talking about how negative plays like sacks are super, super bad. But his ability to avoid sacks, avoid players, get those extra couple of yards and be elusive and shifty and keep his eyes downfield is incredibly impressive. And Washington is going to be very good for a very long time as long as they have that man under center. Our number 2 winner this week, it's blowouts, right? 5 out of the 6 games were blowouts, and you got to see who the real contenders were. Now, we did, of course, a little bit of a tier list right before the NFL playoffs kicked off. We put contenders, we put potentially could get it done, and we put teams that needed a little bit of luck, right? All of the teams that were further back in our contender list are gone. They're not here anymore, right? You have your true contenders, you have your top seeds, and then you have your guys that just couldn't really keep up with the heat in the kitchen, right? The blowouts were there. Now we get pretty, I think, unquestionably the best 8 teams in football left standing at the top of the hill. And I'm very, very excited to see who is left after this week, because this week I think is going to be the most chaotic week that we have seen in the NFL all year. And finally, the number 1 winner. We could not put any team on here but the Washington Commanders, right? The Washington Commanders get their first playoff win in 20 years. Not since 2005 have the Washington Commanders won a playoff game. They have not had this kind of success since 1991 when they last won a Super Bowl. They have not been this kind of franchise where I look at them and say, oh, they are dangerous in my entire lifetime. This is a brand new look for Washington. This is exactly what they needed to escape from the Dan Snyder era, and I feel like they've got it done. Obviously, winning on that doink field goal, I think, is just shutting the door on any kind of bad luck that could have potentially been cursing this franchise for a very long time. This Washington franchise is back from the dumps. They are going to be really good for a very long time, and they should be. If you're a Washington fan, you should be celebrating, right? All over social media, all these last couple days, I've just been seeing posts from Washington fans that have either never had this in their entire life, or Washington fans that have been waiting 20, 25, 30 years for a moment like this. They have not experienced this since childhood. It is incredible to see all of the reaction, all the outpouring for a franchise that has been like a sleeping giant, really. It's going to be I'm going to be very curious to see how the fandom in Washington continues to develop over these next couple of years because, like I said, Jaden Daniels is a guy. And it's going to be very exciting to be a Washington fan, not something that you could say 3 years ago and get a serious look. But those are the biggest winners. Let me know what you thought. Who was the biggest winner this week? We're going to get into the losers coming up after this break, so make sure you stick around for that. 5 losers coming up next here on GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. Welcome back to GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jeremy Lapidus. Today is Tuesday, January 14th. If you were just tuning in, we just went over the 5 biggest winners from NFL Wild Card Weekend. In this segment, we turn our attention to the 5 biggest losers. But before we do that, remember, if you would like to be an even bigger part of the show than you already are, all you need to do is go to gsmcpodcast.net. Or if you are on YouTube, you can use that super chat feature. If you do either of those 2 things, a message should pop up on the bottom of the screen for you, me, and everybody else around the world to see. If you do have a burning question about sports, anything at all that you would like to ask, go ahead and throw that in the comments. Throw it in the chat. I will get to it as soon as I possibly can. I appreciate everybody so much for sticking around, talking some sports with me here on a beautiful Tuesday, January 14th. But like I was saying, we're going to finish off our show here today talking a little bit about the 5 biggest losers from the wild card round. And starting at number 5, I'm going a bit unorthodox, and maybe you guys won't agree with me here, but at number 5, I'm actually putting the Buffalo Bills. And the reason that I'm putting the Bills here at 5 is not because of anything they did in this round. It's because of their draw in the next round, and that being Lamar Jackson and the Baltimore Ravens. We've seen this movie before, right? Early on in the season, the Baltimore Ravens took on the Buffalo Bills, and the Ravens won 35-10. right? They are everything that Buffalo is weak against, and they did a great job against the Packers. I want to make sure I praise them because Josh Allen did MVP level things. Receivers made great plays, and that defense, kudos to that defense. They played amazing against a Broncos team. They were just unable to get anything going all game long, right? But the Bills get the toughest draw. They can still do it. They are a really good team, and they can still do it. But a draw that just kind of exposes all of their biggest weaknesses in the Baltimore Ravens is just a tough one for them. So for those reasons, they are the number 5 loser this week. At number 4, the Packers. Packers wide receivers, Packers injuries more specifically, right? The Packers suffered brutal blows, not just this week, but last week to their team. Honestly, one that they maybe could have won with the way that the Eagles offense was playing if they were completely healthy. Obviously, Jordan Love suffered an injury on his throwing hand. He was good to go, but I don't think he was 100%, right? You have, of course, the injuries to the wide receivers, which were much more public and much more out there. You lose Christian Watson to an ACL. He is done for the year. He is done for most of next year as well. There's a potential that he doesn't even play next year. For a guy that's been riddled by injuries, that is a huge loss, especially for a Packers team that likes to throw it deep. In the game, they lose their number 2 receiver or number 1 receiver in Romeo Doubs to a concussion, and then they lose Jaden Reed to a shoulder injury, right? Top 3 ball catchers all out for the game, and it just puts them in a really tough position, not one that's really advantageous for winning a playoff game on the road against one of the best defenses in the NFL. Now, Josh Jacobs was great. Packers did a good enough job, but at the end of the day, those injuries are going to hurt them into next season, so they are number 4 losers of the week. At number 3, it's Justin Herbert. I love Justin Herbert. He's a great quarterback, and I will buy all of this stock, but he threw 4 interceptions this week. He threw 3 interceptions all season long. He threw more interceptions in this one game than he did the entire NFL season, which is not the kind of stat that you want to be a part of, but it also shows you the good side of Justin Herbert. It shows what he can be. It shows why he is a guy that I really do believe in. Now, not all of it is on him, but what he was unable to do and prove yet again is that he can win in these big-time moments. He's been to 2 playoff games in his career. The first one was the one against the Jaguars, where they had a massive lead, and the Jaguars come all the way back 2 years ago and eliminate them. Then you have this game where they start off with a good lead. Their defense is playing amazing football, and they just keep turning the ball over. Justin Herbert keep throwing interceptions, and a lot of that is on him. Some of it is on his weapons, right? There's a couple of guys out there that probably shouldn't be on the team next year if everything goes well, right? You don't really want to rely on Quentin Johnson. You don't really want to rely on Josh Palmer. I love Josh Palmer as a wide receiver 2 or a wide receiver 3, but he's not a guy that you really want to rely on that much. They just didn't have the pass catchers. They didn't run the ball, and Justin Herbert gets a lot of flack for this, as he should, for throwing 4 interceptions, but he is our number 3 loser of the week. At number 2, it's Mike Tomlin. And we talked a little bit about this, but I've been thinking about this a lot. We talked about it yesterday. What are the Steelers going to do with him? But the noise has started to get a little bit loud for letting him go. I still don't think it's going to happen, and I think that's the smart decision. But if he doesn't win a playoff game next year, he's probably done. That's the thing. They gave him that 3-year contract at the beginning of the year, so he's got a couple more years left on it. And the Steelers, they don't like to fire their coaches, especially one that's been doing as good of a job as Mike Tomlin has done. But the noise is starting to get loud, and it's coming from outside of Pittsburgh this time. I don't know what is going to happen over there, but sometimes you need to make a change. The Pittsburgh Steelers are going to be good. They are. But they need to make a big move this offseason for a quarterback. They need to potentially trade up with a team, give a lot up for it. Again, not the best draft to do it, but they really need a quarterback, and they need one in the worst way. If they trot out Russell Wilson again, if they trot out Justin Fields again, I just don't think that the city of Pittsburgh is going to be very happy, and I don't know how much longer of a leash that they're really going to give to Mike Tomlin, as unfair as that might be. He's our number 2 loser of the week. And the number 1 loser of the week, it's Sam Darnold. There's no one else that could be at the top of this list. Sam Darnold not only lost a game for his team, took 9 sacks, held the ball way too long, was inaccurate, kept overthrowing guys, but probably lost out on about $50 to $60 million total with his performances in these last 2 games. That is a brutal way to end your season, especially one that has been so positive and so good for a guy like Sam Darnold. He is the biggest loser of the week, and I don't think anybody else is even remotely close to how big of a loser that Sam Darnold is right now. He'll bounce back. He'll get still paid probably $30 to $40 million a year, so he'll be just fine. But as far as right now, that was a brutal week. That was a brutal way to end your season, and Sam Darnold is the biggest loser. But let me know what you think. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of this, and thank you everybody so much for tuning in to today's episode of GSMC's Down by Contact Sports Podcast. We will be back tomorrow, same time, same place, talking all of the biggest news from around the world of sports. We'll cover a little bit more NFL. We'll talk some college football, some new rules being proposed over there, and maybe a little bit of hockey and basketball as well. We'll be... Thank you again for tuning in. I'll see you then. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.